Well, here it is, August. Are you ready? I know what happens whenever I open up that folder on my computer for August. It's like the next thing I know, it's Christmas. It's just, it's amazing. But here it is, the first Sunday in August, and this is the month that we traditionally call Unity Month because both of our co-founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, were born during this month. So in August, we like to honor our roots and explore some of the basics of unity. Now, Charles was born on August 22nd of 1854, and Myrtle was born on August 6th of 1845. There they are. Think for a few moments about those dates and consider the times that they lived through. Imagine what it was like during the Civil War. They would have both grown up in all of the chaos and carnage leading up to and going through the Civil War, the single greatest threat to our existence as a nation that we've yet experienced. People call those days the days of the wild and lawless frontier. It was a time of chaotic change. Everything was changing, including the way that people were thinking about the Christian religion. People like the Fillmores were getting a little bit tired of the old-time religion. Here in this picture of Myrtle from one of her younger days, Myrtle in particular was raised a Methodist, but she left the Methodist church because she had a lot of problems with some of the things they were teaching. In particular, the stuff about hellfire and damnation. She just couldn't conceive of a God in her experience who would create human beings in God's image and likeness, and then call them good, and then fry them if they don't get their theology just right. You know, the people in that church down the street, they don't believe the same thing we do. They're going to get fried. Well, she was done with all of that, and Charles, in the next slide here, Charles in his younger days, he was not raised in any kind of a formal religion. In fact, Charles never went to a formal school. He was totally self-taught in terms of everything that he learned about religion and philosophy and business and everything like that. Charles once said when he was younger, he didn't believe in Jesus Christ. And he didn't want anything to do with formal religion. Don't you think that makes him a rather unlikely character to be one of the co-founders of a spiritual movement that at one time was called practical Christianity? I suppose we could say that Charles was a blank slate. He didn't have a lot of pre-existing indoctrination that had to be undone, and sometimes that's a good thing. And as a team, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore brought a fresh perspective to traditional Christian concepts and ideas. They felt that they were free to reinterpret things instead of simply being slaves to the past. And that's the same thing that they told everyone else who came to them to listen to their teachings. They say, you too have that same freedom to evaluate what is being taught and decide for yourself if that still works for you. They're telling us that we still have the same freedom that they had to stop being slaves to the past. Now, in case some of you haven't noticed it yet, unity is a bit unorthodox. And that's intentional. Charles and Myrtle made it their mission to reinterpret Christian orthodoxy. They wanted to keep some of the language and the concepts, but give them new meaning. And that was probably a really good starting place because, you know, if you just come along and decide that you're just going to rip the foundations out of everything and just blow it up and tell people, no, you can't talk that way or use this language or this or that or the other thing, what you end up doing, what you end up being is just as authoritarian as the thing that you're trying to revitalize. You become just as dogmatic in your own way as the thing that you're trying to work with and reinterpret it. People might be more inclined to consider new ideas and a new way of looking at things if they still have something that seems familiar that they can hang on to and work with. I always think that change works best when it's evolutionary rather than revolutionary. Gradual change is easier for people to deal with. So the Fillmores went about their business, and one of the first things that they looked at was this Christian Orthodox doctrine of the Trinity. We've all heard of it. God in three persons, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. It's confusing to a lot of people, myself included. I spent many years in the Catholic seminary, and I never did quite get it. I never did quite understand, how did they come to divide God into three things? If you study the Hebrew Scriptures, all the way from Genesis to Malachi, there's this pervasive theme that we see, which can be summarized by using the first line of a Jewish prayer that's called the Shema Israel. They recite it every day in the morning and in the evening. They say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." Yeah, one, not three, right? The Lord is one. Now, contrary to a lot of things that we hear in our pop culture today, Jesus was not a Christian. He was a devout Jew. He probably recited this prayer every day himself. But because Jesus was a few, maybe I might say many steps ahead of everyone else when it came to the ways that he experienced that oneness of the Lord, his experience was of God around him, God within him, and God that was infinite being. He had an experience of the totality of God that couldn't be caught up in just that one prayerful concept. Three different ways of experiencing that one thing. And Jesus wanted his students, he wanted his followers to also be able to share in that greatly expanded experience of that one thing. But as you might imagine, the religious authorities in that day considered him to be teaching heresy and blasphemy. The religious authorities claimed that they had exclusive control over access to God. And people believed that. Imagine the power that gave them. Imagine the power that people were giving away to the religious authorities. No, you're not entitled to your experience. We'll tell you what it is, and we'll tell you when and how you can have access to the divine. And Jesus wanted his students to have a direct experience. No middleman, no priest of any kind required. So, as you might imagine, those kind of teachings threatened the God monopoly of the temple. His teachings threatened the power structure. And we all know what happens to people who dare to confront or challenge a power structure. The power structure will find a way to silence you. But you can't undo the experience. There were enough followers who had learned to share in Jesus' own unique experience of God. And the power structure couldn't shut that down. One of my favorite images for this comes from a Bible scholar by the name of Walter Wink. And he said that the way they went about trying to stop Jesus was like trying to destroy a dandelion by blowing on the dry seeds. Isn't that a great image? The seeds go spreading out all over the place, and each one of those seeds represents a person who had had that direct experience and is now taking that out to form a new community where the experience of the divine became the primary focus. And that's what happened. Jesus goes from a physical to a spiritual reality, something that can't be destroyed. So those seeds go out. They begin to have their own experience of the divine based on the example of Jesus. And these different communities had different ways of talking about this, different ways of expressing this. And for a couple hundred years, this worked out just fine. Different was not dangerous. The variations were no problem. And then there was a power struggle. That's what it all comes down to, isn't it? Who gets the power? Why do we keep doing that to ourselves? It was decided that because they were hearing different things from different communities, that there has to be a creed. There must be a statement of orthodoxy that you must accept if you wanted to be a part of the club. If you wanted to be a part of this community, everyone had to believe exactly the same thing. Now, what kind of person would want that level of rigidity and discipline and sameness? How about a Roman emperor? Doesn't that fit the bill? Isn't that something that a Roman emperor would want? No, we can't tolerate these differences. Everybody has to believe the same damn thing. This emperor's name was a guy named Constantine. Or you can call him Constantine. I don't care. Either way is fine. No authoritarian stuff here, okay? Constantine, whatever, convenes the Council of Nicaea in the year 325 to bring uniformity into this thing again. All the bishops in the world come together, and this is a great big political haggle fest, the Council of Nicaea. All sorts of political infighting. In fact, there was even a fist fight. Get this. St. Nicholas, yeah, that guy, slaps another bishop named Arius. I mean, think about it. Jolly old St. Nick going upside someone's head. I mean, that's amazing. And he felt very sorry about it later on. But and Arius lost the fight. His position got shuffled away. Interesting. We're not going to get into the details. But after the dust settles, what you have is something called the Nicene Creed, which turns the Trinity, among other things, it turns the Trinity into a written doctrine. You want to be a part of this? This is what you have to believe. And if you don't, you are damned for all eternity. And that language was part of the Nicene Creed. There was this thing at the end called an anathema, which means be ye damned, be ye condemned. Wow. What a switch. 200 years or so, and all of a sudden there we are with this kind of rigidity being installed. Forget about the experience. Forget about the experience. This creed basically says Jesus is God, and you're not. That's what they're all about. Jesus is God, you're not. Let's bring the middleman back into this thing, and the heck with the experience. Doctrine and creed get substituted for direct experience. So then along comes people like Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, who had the audacity to ask some questions. For example, they asked the question, why are we following a 4th century creed in the 19th century? I mean, what's up with that? Why do we allow ourselves to be in bondage to a power structure that tells us that we're evil and unworthy? We should ask that question about any power structure that requires our unquestioning allegiance to an ideology. Charles and Myrtle decided that, people can read, we're free to interpret the Gospels for ourselves and decide what they mean. They wanted to get back to the experience without the middleman. And one of the people who really inspired them on this journey was Ralph Waldo Emerson, who wrote this. He said, "We will walk on our own feet, we will work with our own hands, we will speak our own minds. A nation of men will for the first time exist because each believes himself inspired by the divine soul, which also inspires all men." See, I told you this was a revolutionary time. Change was coming in many different forms. And so the Fillmores were inspired to take these orthodox concepts and reframe them so that people could use them to get back to the direct experience of divine inspiration that we see in the life of Jesus. No middleman required. So, what was it that Jesus was experiencing when he spoke of God as existing in him, around him, and beyond all that is? The Fillmores were offering us an alternative, a possibility. They didn't say you have to believe this. No. They said, here's an alternative, here's a possibility. Consider this. When it comes to the Trinity, Charles asked us to consider this. In his experience, and based on his reading of the Bible, Father, Son, and Spirit represent mind, idea, expression. When you look at Father, Son, and Spirit over there, a couple of things jump out at you. There's a little gender bias, don't you think? And that's never been really addressed to my knowledge. And they're kind of abstract. Again, where is the experience in that? Unless you get back and really look at what was going on in the life of Jesus when these terms were being tossed about. So mind, idea, and expression. For Charles, this was an experience of what we call the creative process. God is the mind that's behind the idea that is also present in the manifestation or that which is being created. And human life mirrors this very same process. Everything we do starts with mind and then proceeds through idea and then onward to expression or manifestation. Now this was revolutionary back in the day. This was a revolutionary way of looking at the Trinity. It's still evolving. I think we're ready to take another step. I think we've reached the point where we need to update the unity version of the Trinity for the 21st century. So, instead of mind, I would invite you to think of it as the infinite experience of God. Mind is infinite God, the eternal creative force that gives rise to the universe and every single thing in it. The divine blueprint, principle, awesome and wondrous, the kind of things which might evoke this experience of God as the infinite could be scenes like this. The Grand Canyon, right? That wonder of creation that we see all around us. Or this, looking up in the starry sky or seeing these scenes from the Hubble telescope where we realize that, boy, oh boy, it's sure a heck of a lot bigger than we are, and that's okay. We don't have to feel small because we know that we're a part of all of this. Another way of looking at it, believe it or not, is this. Jacob tried to explain to me. He knows what this equation means, so you can talk to him afterwards. I don't have a clue. But mathematicians and scientists will often speak of equations as being beautiful. And they will speak of equations with the same kind of consciousness, from the same consciousness that we do when we look up at the starry night. It could be like a religious experience for them. These are all ways of looking at the infinite experience of God. So we go from mind or infinite to idea or intimate. Instead of idea, we can call it the intimate experience of God. That's the experience that we have in our relationships. And that can be any kind of relationship with other people, with other forms of life, whatever form it takes. It is the experience of the infinite becoming personal. Something that we can relate to in our lives. The philosopher Martin Buber, he called it the I-thou relationship. One of the ways that we can experience the divine. It's the same relationship that we talk about in unity when we say to another person, I behold the Christ. That's the intimate face of God. It's the same thing that they mean in the Hindu tradition when they say, Namaste, the divine in me salutes the divine in you. And even a hermit can have this experience because the divine can be perceived in a flower or a blade of grass. All sorts of different ways that we can relate to God as something intimate and personal. And then finally we come to Holy Spirit, or what Charles called expression. In our updated version, we'll call this one our inner experience of God. The still, small voice. It's one of the places Karen was leading this morning in her meditation. This one's an inside job. This is the realm of the mystical experience. This is where we experience the divine as that in which we live, move, and have our being. Paul talks about that experience. It goes back a long ways, and somehow we got away from it, and the Fillmores say it's time to get back to it. So there it is. Another way of looking at the Trinity. Infinite God, intimate God, inner God, And it's all about experiencing one thing. 3 ways of experiencing one thing, which means that instead of a Trinity, it really is a unity. Spend some time this week contemplating this. Take a little time each day, maybe toward the end of the day, and just think back on how many different ways did I have an experience of the one presence and one power today. Infinite, intimate in a relationship, inner in that still small voice. Take some time this week contemplating that, see how it shows up in your life, and then join us next Sunday and find out what unity does to the Bible. See you then.